Hey, thank you all so much for joining another episode of Celeste the Therapist podcast. My name is Celeste. I'm a therapist from Boston. If this is your first time in here, thank you so much for giving me a try. What I do on this podcast is I get to talk to amazing people that are doing things to empower the lives of others by sharing their story. But once a month, Jermaine Morris and I come on and we get to talk about ways to get your mind right. I'm going to let him introduce himself to you all.
Hello, I'm Jermaine Morris. I'm a certified coach and consultant with a practice that's based around a DISC assessment, which is basically a test that highlights our preference to how we deal with problems, how we interact with people. It also it highlights potential blind spots in our behavior, shows us ideal ways to communicate. It's a really good way to kind of give us a good diagnosis of how we operate in the world and kind of how we interface with life.
I like that. And then tell people about your website. You have a website. I always want to make sure people know how to reach you.
Yes. And if you're interested in learning more about the assessment, setting up a free 15-minute consultation, any questions that can be answered or anything along that, you can go to mykeystome.com. That's mykeystome.com. And answer your questions and get you started.
Nice. So everyone loves, the way that you frame things, and I think I'm very cognitive. I have a way of like talking about things, and I like to use analogies, but you could be very literal, which is so helpful for so many people. One of the things you mentioned that you do is talk about blind spots, and one of the blind spots that I think a lot of us struggle with is the idea of closure. This is a topic that you brought up that has come up a few times. And when, just for point of reference, Jermaine gives me a topic on what he wants to talk about, and it's always good. But the idea of closure is something I think everybody kind of struggles with in different capacities. I think we only think about closure probably ending a relationship or when somebody passes away. But there's so many other ways that closure doesn't happen in different areas of our life. Do you think that's accurate?
Yeah. I think that's true. The first thing we think of is somebody passing away or ending a relation. Usually somebody ending a relationship with us, and that we're like, oh, why or how come, or and we kind of feel in the air about something. But really, just the idea of closure is acceptance. Accepting whatever it was, whatever it is, and then whatever it's gonna be. And so that lack of acceptance is what leaves a lot of us kind of just stuck.
With the blind spots, because, we just talked, there's two ways that we all kind of are familiar with. But what are some other ways that you find people find themselves stuck because they haven't given themselves closure around a situation that you see pretty often?
Yeah. So some of the ways that people might miss is reconciling these past decisions. So we will do things, jobs that we maybe passed on, or we feel maybe we left early and should have stayed at. Choice of school, where we live, like things that if you find yourself saying, looking back at a job you worked at 10 years ago, like I should have stayed there, or if I'd have stayed in school longer for this, or if I hadn't done that. And closure is really just closure of the decision. So if we decided to drop out of school, if we decided to go to this university, if we decided to leave this job, just coming to terms with that was the decision we made with the information we had at the time, which we believe which was best in the moment, and then putting a period at the end of the sentence. But when those blind spots, we can find ourselves reminiscing, revisionist history, constantly looking back because we have not fully accepted the decision that we made, and we haven't reconciled with maybe what came after.
And as you're talking about the decisions we make, because I know some people struggle with decisions, but now that we're talking about this idea of closure, I'm wondering, like, is part of that due to the fact that they haven't made closure with a previous decision, and they find themselves probably ruminating and thinking about what they didn't do as opposed to what they can do?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it's they didn't close with the previous decision, or they didn't like the outcome of the decision they made. So it's instead of, I shouldn't have done that, or I wasn't 100% sure and I went ahead with something, and we'll sit there and keep saying, I shouldn't have listened to my mom. I shouldn't have listened to her. I shouldn't have listened to him. I should have. And should is that precursor to lack of closure, lack of acceptance. When we just keep looking back and using, I was joking about should land. Should land is a highly populated place with a bunch of miserable people. That when we just keep thinking about what we should have done, we should have moved differently. We should have. That means we have not accepted that decision, and we're looking for something to make that decision okay.
That makes sense. And so one of the things I just named is lack. Like I think when people are not able to create closure around decisions, and again, we're human. And I love when you said this before on the podcast, make the best decisions with the information that you have. I feel like we can be our biggest bullies around life, and our lack of progress is not because of external factors. A lot of it is internal factors that we're not aware of. Again, a blind spot, right? But a lot of times, the stuckness that we see looks like lack of moving forward. Maybe finding themselves in the same cycle over and over again. What are some other ways you find people, like how does it show up when people are not creating closure in their life? For people that may not be able to see that for themselves.
A lack of gratitude and appreciation for where you
Oh
currently are.
yeah, that's so true. I like that
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, because you keep thinking there was something better or there's
Yeah.
something else. So there's not appreciation for where you currently are, or the experiences that you lived through, or the better place you are with perspective because of what you went through. There's no appreciation or gratitude for that. It's just being judged to a hypothetical outcome. Had I not done this, I would be better. Well, maybe, or you made a decision and it was hard. The outcome that came from whatever decision was made, it was a tough road. The belief that it would have been easier or better had you done something else takes away it makes what you did go through invalid. And there's no appreciation for what you did actually experience, because it's being held up to something that may or may not have ever come to fruition. So when you're saying what does that look like, what's an example of lack of closure? Lack of gratitude and lack of appreciation.
Yeah, and that's big because when we are not able to create gratitude, we find ourselves feeling miserable. I find myself constantly having this conversation with people around, because they're not where they want to be. But I talk about looking at where they are and how to look at the little things. And where we're not able to find gratitude, then we are only looking at the things that we don't have or the places we haven't gone. And that's not in the moment. You're not able to be in the moment when you're like far away or in the past. It's like a breeding ground for anxiety, for depression, right? There's already enough going on in the world that can kind of unfortunately create like some negative thoughts. Why do it to yourself? For anybody that's listening, I love the fact that you bring up this idea of people not creating closure in their lives may find themselves struggling with gratitude. But how can you be grateful or have gratitude if you are living in the past? It's hard.
Yeah, it's so gratitude is grounding.
Hmm.
So if you're thinking about what is being gracious, what is processing gratitude? Gratitude is being grounded with where you are, with whatever that is, and
Yeah.
finding appreciation for whatever that is.
Yeah.
So it's in this moment. Maybe I'm living in an apartment, but had I stayed at that job, I would have got a raise and I would have had a house now. Okay, well, maybe. But gratitude would be the roof over my head right now. And so when we're not, so replace gratitude with grounded. When we're not grounded, it's going to be very hard to be centered with perception and perspective, because you're
Yeah.
not grounded, you're floating. So you're either floating forward or floating backwards, but you're not centered with where you are. So now when we don't practice that grounding, that gratitude, that appreciation, that closure, every decision that we're making is based off of floating. So we're not making
Mhm.
new decisions off of being grounded and centered with gratitude and appreciation. We're making new decisions off of floating, either forwards or backwards, with what we think we should be doing or what we think how we think we should be living. And that's going to be make very difficult to make future decisions, which will usually lead to more lack of closure and lack of gratitude.
Wow, that's really good. And you've shared this before, but the idea of acceptance, because when you talked about gratitude, it's like accepting where you are. And some people I know some listeners may say, but I don't like where I'm at. And so I think it's important to note that we're not saying that you're satisfied with where you are, regardless of satisfaction. You are where you are. Is
Yeah,
that like, tell people a little bit about the acceptance is not about like saying like, oh, I'm satisfied. It's not about your satisfaction, right?
yeah, not at all. So if you find yourself in a ditch, in a hole that you have to get yourself out of, accepting that I'm in this hole and the only way I'm going to get out is if I get myself out. That's acceptance. Like, it doesn't mean I like the hole. It doesn't mean I like the fact I have to try to climb out. It doesn't mean I like the experience at all. But acceptance is I'm going to do something about this. Like, and it's within my means to do something. If I'm floating about, man, I should have never made that left or I wouldn't have ended up here. That's really not going to have anything to do with you getting out of the hole. Somebody should have checked on me and got me out by now. That you're floating forwards and backwards. None of that has anything to do with you getting out of this hole. So being grounded and understanding and accepting is I'm in this hole right now. What can I do to get out of this, regardless of if I quote unquote should or should not be there? So yes, acceptance is not about I like it. It's just accepting and
Yeah.
understanding this is where I am in this moment.
When you say like having the means, because there's a couple of things I think that get people trapped that I would love for you to like flesh out. But I think one is dealing with some past inner trauma where their system may go into like this stuck mode. They don't realize they have options. And the second one is, let's use the hole for example. I don't have AAA, so like, but that would be the easiest option then for me to like take out my tire. Let's say I had a flat tire
Right.
and I don't have the best tools, but what do you have? I think those two things, when it comes to having the means of one, people mentally getting stuck and not realizing they have options, or two, not being able to use what you have
Yeah.
and
So
starting
so
where
say
you are.
so if you drive a car and it kind of hits a ditch and you get a flat tire, for sticking with if that's the example we're using. And so A, I don't have AAA. B, I pop the trunk and there's no jack, there's no spare tire, there's nothing. So I'm like, I don't have any resources to me to fix this tire on the side of the road. So then I make the decision to either A, sit in the car and hope somebody comes by to help, B, lock the car up and start walking and see if I can get some help. Do you know what I mean? Like making the decision and then just living with whatever the decision is. So if I decide that I'm going to lock the car up and walk the 2 miles to the nearest, truck stop to get help, and something happens to the car in my 2 mile walk, I accept the fact that I made the best decision at the time with what I had. And if something happened to the car while I was gone, I shouldn't have, quote unquote, stayed with the car. Do you mean it's the fact of I made the decision to leave the car here and go walk to get help, and coming closure with that decision, of accepting that decision. So whatever comes after that, I'm okay with making that decision, because when I weighed out my options at the time, that is the decision that I decided, and being okay with it and moving forward. But a
Mhm.
lot of us will sit there, if the outcome isn't favorable, then we go back and try to rehash this decision and go through all that should and this and that and the third. In reality, say if we could have went back in time and stayed with the car could have got hit and us being in it. And then it would have
Yeah.
been, I should have just left when it was, the sun was up. So there's no guarantee that the other option would have been better. So just closure with the decision that we made, and then just move forward from that point.
Yeah. And when you like I feel like making a decision, action is better than no action. And I want to like acknowledge that some people do struggle with some anxiety on making decisions.
Yeah.
But then I also know that the being left with years, months, like time going by and not doing anything will actually keep you more stuck. So
Yeah.
sometimes it's hard to actually like move forward and make a decision because of the fear of the what ifs. But then also like not doing anything, I feel like there's longer fear of what ifs.
And that's still a decision. So
Yeah.
if we think of, if we stand on the ledge and we have to decide to jump. Okay, well, I'm just standing there thinking, should I or shouldn't I? Should I or shouldn't I? You still decided. Like you decided to not make a decision definitively, but the fact that you didn't move, you decided not to jump. Like you're for a lot of us who we think that I have decision making issues, I have this. When you peel back that layer, you're making a decision. What do you want to eat today? I don't know. You're still deciding to not make a decision. Like you're still, that the inactivity is still a choice. So if then it's, well, 2 hours later, I'm still hungry. Yeah, well, you still chose not to pick something.
It's true.
So so the idea, it's just the way we frame decision making.
Yeah.
I didn't choose between these two things. Yes, but the third option was choosing neither.
Yeah. That's true. And when I talk to people about, they say, "Well, I can't be consistent." I said, "Well, you've been consistently inconsistent." And, and so it's the framing of it is important.
Yes.
When it's a great point that you bring up for people listening that may find themselves in that cycle, which a lot of people have been, where it's like, you know what, me not making a choice on which direction I want to go and staying stagnant is an actual choice.
Yeah.
And
Choosing to sit at
thinking
the fork
about,
in the road. Yeah. Choosing,
yeah,
you're at the stop sign. You can go left or you can go right. Well, I don't know if I go left, if I go right, I go, okay, you're still choosing to sit here. It's the
yeah,
causality
that's
to the
true.
to going back and forth between left or right. So you're choosing to stay here until you can decide left or right. So a choice
Yeah.
was still made,
Hmm.
you know.
And then for people that are thinking about like the what ifs, trying to not get only stuck in the negative, because what if this goes well, right? When I was starting the podcast, the what if this doesn't go well? And then I also looked on the other side and said, well, what if it does go well? Right? Because if it doesn't go well, then I go back to the drawing board and try something different.
Yeah.
And I've always had this mentality. Like I've never cared. I realized when I went to private practice, I realized how many people don't think like I do. I think I've always been solution focused and oriented about things, and I never cared about your opinion of me, and not in a cocky way, but in a way of like me just moving forward with my goals. But I realize people put a lot of stake in what other people are thinking about their situation, and suffering because they know there's more that they want to do out of life and they're not doing it.
Yeah. And I think what's hard for some people, it's not always the what if, it's when you're dealing with past failure.
Hmm.
So there are some people who have decision making anxieties because it's what can go wrong or what could happen.
Yeah.
But it's a lot harder when you've already taken some L's.
Hmm.
So when you've made a decision that you felt confident about and you didn't get the desired result, now it's, well, the last time I felt confident about this decision and I found myself, I lost a bunch of money, or I lost my job, or lost my relationship, or whatever, but something that was important to that individual, and you're like, I felt really, really good about that decision. So now I don't trust my decision
Decision
making
maker.
because I felt really good, really confident. I thought I dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and it just did not end up where I wanted to end up. That's where the closure with the acceptance of that happened, period. It's not the carryover. What is it, like Walmart with the rollover prices? Like you use it for a point of reference, but it's not the end all be all to decision making in the future. You know, you making this decision in 2015 to now you can't make a decision in 2022 because you didn't like the result of the 2015 decision. That's, you're making a decision while floating. You're
Yeah,
not grounded,
makes
and
sense.
you didn't take the lessons from the 2015 decision and outcome. Find the things that the tools that you learned and whatever struggles that came from that, and or even just the experience that came from that, and showing gratitude for that to ground yourself to make a new decision. You're floating in the past about the past issues, and you're looking at the future of what could go wrong again. So it's going to be hard to make a decision confidently because there's no closure from the previous one because you didn't like the outcome. I know it's a lot of talking. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. It makes me think about like, well, what does closure realistically look like? Because we say like we put a period on it, right? But also part of what you said is looking at what did you learn from it?
Yeah,
Because I try to tell people to look at some of the things as a learning experience or the beauty and the struggle. Like, what did you get out of it?
exactly.
And unfortunately, in America, like we only see like I say success, quote unquote, with the outcomes, but not this journey. You know, like social media, we see the highlighted reels. We don't see the journey to that most
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
So we don't realize that people have taken L's and use those until you hear their story. They've used those as learning lessons. But tell people like what does closure look like realistically if they're finding themselves feeling drawn to this idea of closure?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's accepting whatever that was, like whatever that situation turned out. So, like I said, the most common one is where we have like either relationships, interpersonal relationships, romantic relationships, or even family, where some either dating stuff, love, or somebody passing away. So, if you're talking about closure, so closure is an inside job. It does not require the other person, and it does not require somebody else's participation. So if it was a romantic relationship and it just ended, and we're still hung up about the person, or we're still trying to figure out why, or why did it in our mind seem abruptly to end, or those types of things, it's understanding that it's over. How I got here is separate than like what it was. So these are two. So talking, I was talking. So to sit there and say that, okay, that relationship ended. I still have questions. I'm not sure. Could I have done something differently? Could I, whatever? Maybe. Like, but the reality of it is it's coming to terms with that being over first. So regardless if you could have done something, if you couldn't change, because some people are like, well, I want to learn from it or whatever. Come to terms with that is done. And so when it comes to moving forward, it's what do I recognize? What do I see? What do I want to do? If I need to do some growth, if I missed communication, if I missed signs, these are things that I can work on. Like if I'm not understanding how something played out, you come to work and you thought everything was cool and you got fired that day. Well, what did I get fired for? We just decided to go a different direction. I can honestly say I heard that statement a few times in my 20s. You know, we're just gonna go a different route, and it doesn't quite include you. All right, okay, my bad. Something I did does not fit this anymore. I could be perfect as an employee, but that's not the type of employee they wanted. You could have shown up the exact way you needed to be in a relationship, but the person decided that's not the type of person they wanted anymore. They're not wrong for not choosing you. The company doesn't need to burn down because you were fired. The person who left you doesn't need to, there's no karma attached to it because they don't want you anymore. Like, it's just like understanding this is done. Ground yourself with this. What experiences that happened previously can I take from this? And then start making decisions to move forward. If you don't get it from one and you have the exact same situation start happening later, you'll start to see the patterns for the quote unquote closure you're looking for. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So if you're looking at the one off where this was the love of my life and I just don't understand why it ended and this, that, there's a picture there was an expectation that was there, an imagination that was there that was not translating to reality. Either your experience of them or their experience of you. Either way, it doesn't matter if you never get that answer. Because if you can't get past that, I'm never going to find out what 2 + 2 equals. You will be stuck staring at the chalkboard for the rest of your life, and the rest of your life will pass you by.
Yeah,
So when
no.
it comes to closure, it's accepting. Doesn't mean like stuck in the ditch. It doesn't mean I like the outcome. It doesn't mean I
Mhm.
like maybe some of these questions in the air or that I like not knowing certain part. It just means that that is over, and I just need to accept that being over and
Yeah.
start making decisions moving forward based upon where I'm currently standing.
Yep.
That makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Another like realistic relationship is like family, like whether it's a parent who
Yeah.
refuses to work on themselves. And people say, well, why do they speak to me like this, or why can't they just see me? And I said, you got to learn, you got to grieve like the fact that you can't have the relationship with your mom or your dad that you want, and accept what you have so you can decide what you want to do when you see them, how you want to operate, what boundaries you want to have. Because the idea of you making somebody see you or making somebody see your value, you can't make a job see your value. If
No.
they choose not to see you, or if a partner chooses not to be with you, your value doesn't change. And I think with family members, especially like parents, I think people really struggle with that. And one of the things you said is that closure is an inside job. It would be nice if the parent or the partner or whoever had a dialogue with you. That would be great. That's an added bonus. But
Yeah.
if that doesn't happen, my peace, my happiness, my joy is not contingent on whether or not Jermaine is gonna like connect with me and let me and talk to me about what he feels. Or I can't let that be um contingent upon my peace. If it happens, that's great. But looking at closure as an inside job is, I think, important for people to
Yeah.
understand.
And the probability of you getting the actual answer you're looking for is very, very small. Like when we sit there and say, just why? Just how come?
Yeah.
Dad, why weren't you there? Mom, how come you walked out? How come so and so divorced me? How come so and so fired me? The reason you get is most likely not going to be something that just brings it all full circle and brings all this
Yeah.
peace and happiness. You're most likely not going to get it, because typically
Yeah.
when we're dealing with people, if that's the case, if it's something where it's deep levels of interpersonal relationship and open communication and transparency and all those sorts of things, you would have got your answer. So normally
Mhm.
we're asking those things of people who don't have them to give anyway. You're looking for a degree of
Great
accountability and
point.
self-awareness and communication and emotional intelligence and understand. A lot of times the people who just ghost you, they don't have it to give you.
Mhm.
The people who weren't that, like, they're not in a position to give you what you're looking for anyway. And if you're standing there waiting for somebody to deliver it in order for you to be okay to move forward, you can find yourself waiting a very long time. So
Mhm.
when it comes to that closure, it's focus on what you can control, controlling what you can control. You can control what you focus on, the lessons that you take from something and how you want to move forward. And that's not contingent on the other person picking up the phone, showing up and visiting, or responding to your letter.
Right. And I know this happens a lot for people on like a healing journey, especially if you're one of the first people in your family to like start working on themselves. There's a
Yeah.
lot of closure that is going to happen without like other people being able to converse, maybe down the road. But like Jermaine said, this is going to be a inside job, because you're dealing with other humans who may not have the emotional intelligence you have, or gone through the journey that you've gone through. I think it's really hard when people talk about healing or being awakened by things as this beautiful thing, but sometimes it's really hard when you start to see kind of what has been happening and what you have been allowing, um, and what you didn't have control over. But the closure piece is going to help you from getting stuck in that grief, I think.
Yeah, and when you think about, so that's a really good point about people who start going to therapy or people who start their
Hmm.
healing journey. Well, when you
Mhm.
do it, your eyes become open to a whole lot of things and a bunch of
Yeah.
changes. And I reference so many things to that first Matrix movie. And
You
you
do.
remember the first Keanu movie. She's got so much stuff for mental health in there. And the premise of the people who were plugged in could live great, amazing lives. But the people who got unplugged, they were talking about, they were eating soup, this like soup type food that was bland and horrible. They were living in cold, sleeping in cold metal beds with, the same clothes. Like,
Just surviving.
yeah, but they were awake and they knew. And so when you try to go back and get somebody to leave whatever being plugged in to whatever belief system they have, whatever their coping situation is, and you're trying to get them to get into the ship with you, because this healing process is not just this beautiful, transformative, peaceful, serene
No.
thing. It's a lot of pain. It's a lot of struggle. There's a lot of work that goes into that. There are people
Yeah.
who don't want to join you. Like I was referencing that
Yep.
movie. There was a guy who was like, he sold out the entire ship to get plugged back in. He was like, sold out Morpheus and all of them. He's like, look, man, just put me back in. Put me back to the power plant. Plug me up. I don't want to know nothing about this real world stuff. And so if we're sitting there saying, well, why can't you just, how come she won't? How come he can't? Why can't you just, they're not trying to join you in that ship. And you
Mhm.
have to come to terms, they may never. And so
Mhm.
they're going to hold on to whatever they were going to hold on to. And like I said, if we're waiting for them, we're just waiting. And the only person who's getting shortchanged is us, because
I
they're
know.
living their life. And most times they're not, like when your job fires you back in 2018, there may not even be a management staff that's there now that was there when you were there. Nobody's thinking about you working there. However, if you haven't figured out if you haven't come to grips with why you got fired, you're still mad at the company. And ain't nobody working there even know who you are anymore. Like we're the ones who are stuck, who are shortchanging our life and existence, waiting for validation that may never come.
Yeah. And if you start to frame it that way and realize like you're holding yourself back,
Yeah.
every chance I get when I'm talking to people, because if they start saying, well, why won't they do this or why didn't, and I realize if they're saying that out loud, that means that's the way they're thinking. And so
Mhm.
like the things that Jermaine just said, or why won't they do this or why can't, when you find yourself trying to answer somebody else's behavior, it's so important to kind of go back in and be like, hold on, wait, what part of this do I have control over? You'll save yourself a lot of time, a lot of heartache, and a lot of misery, because there's no way to control anybody's behavior. You can look at what your role is in the
Yeah.
situation. And I think that's where, and part of that role may be I need to have closure that this relationship doesn't work anymore for me because of how I'm being treated in it, right? That may be part of the awakening, but until you begin to look at like your power in situations, you'll find yourself, I think, feeling stuck.
Yeah, and that gratitude is so important to so
Mhm.
even when we come from like some really bad circumstances, to be able to have gratitude and appreciation, there's a blessing in that. So like
Yeah.
there was, I know those analogies, this real brief story, give you the Cliff Notes version of the story. And so there was a story, I'd heard it and it was just like, it really resonated with me. And it was a story of a father and son. And so this thing takes place like centuries ago. It was a father and son, and they were farmers. And that was their whole thing. They lived off of, made all their money. They sustained off of what they farmed, what they gardened. And so when they get ready for the new, what is it, season, when they get ready to plant, son comes running in the house and yells to his father. He's like, "Hey, father, I don't know what happened, but the mule died. The mule that we used to till the soil with." He said, "The mule just died. I don't know what's wrong with it." And so the father walks outside, and the son is hysterical. And he's like, "The mule is dead." He said, the ground is too hard. There's no way I can be able to plow this field without a mule. I don't know. What are we going to do? Like our whole livelihood is based around farming. Father just kind of looks at him. He's like, "I'm not sure. I can't call it." He kind of walks in. Son's frustrated. Like, "You're not amped? Like, you're not like," father's just like, "We'll figure it out." And so father goes in the house, son goes for a walk. As he's walking, he comes back at the end of the night, and the father can hear him screaming as he's running towards the house, like excited. And he's like, Father, come out. Father walks out. So what's going on? He said, we don't have to worry about the mule that died. 50 wild horses just wandered onto our property. Like we're set. We don't have to worry about this mule. Not only do we have a horse that can plow the field, but we don't have to be farmers anymore. We can breed horses. We make way more money off of horses than we'll ever make off of, vegetables. We're straight. Father's like, sounds good. I can't call it. So the son goes out in the morning and he goes out to break the first horse, because in order to get a wild horse, you can't just put a saddle on it. You have to, break him and domesticate him. So the son goes out there to get the first horse, and they're not ranchers, they're farmers. So he's trying to figure out how to break this horse, and the horse is not messing with him. The horse turns around, kicks him, shatters his leg, breaks his leg in like a dozen different pieces. Son screaming. Father comes out, looks at him. This is old school, so he need to splint, put two, sticks around it, splints him up, drags him in the house, puts his leg up. Son's like, what are we going to do? We got these horses and we can't do nothing with them. You're older. I know if I couldn't break them, you ain't about to be out here like now, and we can't farm either. Like, I don't know what we're going to do. So while he's sitting there, there's a call that comes, like he hears this stomping. A bunch of horses are coming up the pathway to their property. So this is centuries ago. And the guy comes up to it and he says, I'm here for your son. And he's like, what? He said, on order of the emperor, all sons of fighting age have to go off to war. Long story, I know, I'm tying it up. And so he said, all sons have to go to war. And the father looks at him, he says, you can't take my son. And he's like, all sons of fighting age have to fight. And he says, look at him. He walks him in the house. He sees his son, his legs shattered in a dozen pieces. He says, my son can't fight. So the guy turns around and says, okay, crosses his name off his list, gets back, rides off on the horse. And then notification comes in later that the 8,000 soldiers that went away to go fight, all 8,000 of them died. So everybody who went to go fight in this war that they came to get his son, every last one of them was killed. None of them survived. And so for a lot of us, when it comes to the closure aspect, we get hung up on the fact that our mule died, or we get hung up on the fact that our leg is broken, that we miss the blessing that all those things happening saved us from dying in the war. Like the closure aspect is that you may not have gotten the initial thing you wanted, or it may even been a bad circumstance that happens. But when we ground ourselves in the appreciation and the gratitude, that's where you can see the blessing for the situation that you came to. A lot of us are hung up on, why did my mule die? And we never move on. Wow, or I thought I caught a break. Why did my leg break? And now I don't know what I'm going to do. And we can't see the big picture of the blessing. And that comes from the appreciation and the gratitude.
Wow, that's really good. And you cannot go back in time, and I think that's the biggest lesson is like this: the mule died. I can't change the fact that the mule's not here no more. I can't change. And I think sometimes when we're ruminating over these things and not sticking in the gratitude and grounding in it, because you can either ruminate over it or create gratitude and ground yourself in where you are. Like those are options you have. Which one feels better, right? Yeah. The one that you're ruminating, what if or why didn't, but the gratitude. And that's why, it's not that I'm looking at everything in rosy glasses when I talk about gratitude. It's because I recognize that actually feels better. And why would I want to feel worse? Like if I have power to change my perspective and shift my thought process, why not choose that? I tell people the mind is one of the most underutilized parts of our body that we can actually like reframe and change our perspective by our thoughts, right? We can help heal ourselves with our thoughts, with the way that we're framing things. Exactly. And so if you look at the fact that you can't go back, so why not choose gratitude?
Yeah. And if you could have went back and the mule never died, you saw what the outcome wasn't better. Mm-mm. Like, so for some people they're hung up on, man, if this mule had just made it another season, we'd have been able to farm and we'd have been fine. Yeah. And you'd have been one of the 8,000 soldiers.
Yeah.
Like there's no guarantee that if we go back and change, stayed at the job, stayed in a relationship, stayed living at home, stayed doing this, that the outcome was necessarily better. There's no way to gauge that. So it's about the grounding and the appreciation for where we are right now. What are the blessings I can find in where I am now? What are the things that I can appreciate? Even if it was, I learned that I got no business trying to domesticate a horse. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if that's what learning where I shouldn't be, like learning things that I need to keep away from my life. because of the
Mhm.
struggles that came with trying to be a part of this or participate in that. I learned where I don't need to be.
Mhm.
Like being grounded, finding that gratitude and that appreciation helps bring closure to the decisions that we make, and that helps it make it easier to move forward.
That's good. I love it. This was really good. I know uh a lot of people are gonna find something out of this. They always do. And I always tell people if anything is resonating for you, like you gotta really be intentional.
Yeah.
Like not let this just be a feel good podcast. Because once you mentioned that you wanted to talk about closure, I think about just so many people that are literally like feeling so stuck.
Yeah.
Part of it is because of lack of closure and a lack of the grounding and appreciation on where they are. And it's crazy because Jermaine can't make me have gratitude or see where I'm at.
Mhm.
You know, like you're Jermaine's the only, I'm the only one who have the power to see um where I am, to create grounding, being grounded in where I am. Like I see it for people that I work with, but I recognize I don't push it down their throat, right?
Yeah.
I recognize like how hard it is to get to that point when, especially if you've never been poured into, or this is not a kind of like mindset that you're used to. It's really hard to think this way. But if what you're doing isn't working and you've been ruminating and holding on to, then it's kind of like, what do you have to lose by trying this other way of thinking?
Yeah. And a big part about acceptance when we're pertaining to closure when it comes to other people is that an undesired outcome does not mean the other person is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like somebody not choosing us is okay. A
Yeah.
job not choosing us is okay. A school denying us is okay. Like us not getting the desired result does not mean something bad needs to happen to them or that
Yep.
there's something wrong with them. Or they didn't
Mm-hmm.
appreciate me or they didn't see my value. Okay. That's just not what they're looking for. And they'll figure it out down the road if they made the right decision or not for them. But holding on to the resentment for another human being is also what denies the closure. When
Mm-hmm.
we have to insult somebody for not choosing us, when we have to insult
Mm-hmm.
somebody's, oh, they'll get theirs or they'll figure it out or they'll be, and we got all this negative stuff to throw onto them, that means there's a lack of acceptance that's there. And it diminishes the ability to ground and to have gratitude.
So true.
Yeah. So just to
There's a
throw that
lot of
out there
wasted
too.
energy too. It's a lot of wasted energy.
That bitterness means that there's not an acceptance that has happened, that there's not that closure piece that has taken place. It means we're still holding on to shoulda, woulda, coulda, and that's just energy that we could be pouring into ourselves and in the life that we do want to have.
I want to say this really quick because this comes up often. Because I don't think we don't talk about closure enough. But also, as we get older, I'm about to hit 40 soon. But
Welcome to the
I'm
club.
noticing like people in their 20s and 30s, and as they're getting careers, families, kids, whatever, their friendships aren't looking the same. And I'm constantly, I don't think people talk about the fact that we may not keep the same people as we get older because lifestyles look different. And I know we've had this dialogue before, but for people in this boat of struggling with that, it's okay to say to come to terms with the fact that like this isn't the same relationship, right? It looks differently. We can't do the same things that we did before. People are holding on to what we've done in our teens and our early 20s, and then we get to our 30s and it's not the same. And I think people feel stuck, and they struggle with that friend, instead of recognizing that their friend is in a different space. They can't be partying or whatever, doing these things that they did before. So I just it just made me think about that because I feel like people are struggling with the way the relationships in their friend group start to look um,
Yeah,
as they
one of the
grow.
ways I looked at that. So imagine if high school was 7 years instead of 4. So imagine if you stayed in high school until you're 21 until you're 18.
Hmm.
So is it to say that I couldn't learn anything in high school, 19, 20, 21? There's probably a good chance.
Hmm.
I never read a textbook in high school that said the end.
Right.
We never,
You
there's
keep
always a whole
learning.
bunch of there's a whole bunch of curriculum that doesn't get brought up or
Hmm.
doesn't go in depth. An extra 3 years in high school could probably benefit, you know, I guess is maybe junior college is closer to that. Like
Yep.
you could learn more if you stayed in high school for 7 years. But here's the difference though, if you did. So I'm 20 playing on the varsity team against 14-year-olds,
Right.
15-year-olds. It's going to be an R. Kelly homecoming. Like, there's certain
Right.
dynamics that need to change. There's stuff that there's a reason why, okay, we need to, okay, 18, I'm out, because there's a different dynamic between what's happening and what I've been accustomed to. So sometimes we have people who are 20 in high school still, and they can't figure out why it doesn't feel the same, or the dynamic is now different, even though they're doing the same thing. It's like, I haven't changed. Like, I'm still the same guy. I'm still doing the same stuff, but now it's weird, or now it's awkward, or because you're 20 asking the 15-year-old a homecoming. Like, there's a change that happened around you, even if you didn't. And
Right.
that the acceptance is, okay, that page is turned. Like, the friends who we used to go to the bar with, they now go to, they got play dates with their
Church.
kids, or they
Kids.
soccer
Yeah.
moms now, or they don't go to the club on Saturday. They do brunch on Sunday now, or
Right.
or every free minute, they're just professional Uber drivers for a bunch of small broke people. Like, just they're just chauffeurs for a bunch of little people from now on. So they don't, we may still be this, I'm the same guy, I'm the same girl. Yeah, but the environment has changed, the dynamic has changed, and that's okay.
And that's okay. Yeah.
That's the appreciation and the gratitude that, okay, that's okay. It's a
Create
new
closure
chapter.
around it.
Yes, like, that was what it was. Period.
I like
Where
it.
am I now? This is where I'm at now.
Yeah. That's good. This was good. Thank you so much for the amazing topics you always bring to the podcast. People love you. Can you just tell people again how to find you and your website?
The website is mykeystome.com. Like I said, it gives you more information on what the assessment is, and set up a free 15-minute consultation where we can answer any questions and get you started. And then all social media platforms for everything is at J Morris CEO.